Hello everyone and welcome to this Info Security Magazine webinar where we'll be focusing on network detection and response tools and how to ensure your business has the right capabilities and knows how to operate it. Today we're joined by three excellent panelists who I will introduce after going through some quick housekeeping notes. First, welcome. We will be running some polls throughout the session, so please do join in with those when they appear. And if you have any questions for our speakers during this session, please use the question tab on your screen to submit them. Just make sure you click submit so they come through to me. And also, if you're joining and want to earn your CPE credits, you will get 1 credit based on minimum attendance of 50 minutes, that's 50. Once you've done that, you can download your certificate from your Info Security Magazine account, and the certificates will take around 48 hours to be processed. So with that, let me introduce our panelists for today's session. We're joined by Andrew Hay, who is CISO at Lars, and Diana Kelly, the CSO at CyberEyes. Hi guys, and we will also be having a presentation from Carl Bolterstein, Director of Product Management of OpenText. So welcome everyone. Just before I head into Carl's presentation, I'm going to launch the first poll of the session, and we'd like to know from you, our audience, do you currently have a dedicated NDR tool? So that should be live on your screens now to answer. But now I will launch Carl's presentation and we'll kick off.
Great. So what we're really painting here is for looking at your NDR tool, and really this is either before you make a purchase or your current tool is making sure it doesn't turn into a fire hose that just keeps trying to get away from you and your SOC. So really it's the premise of keeping your NDR in check. And when we're really looking at an NDR, is this the right tool in the first place? This is coming from, I've been in this space for a very long time, and is this truly the visibility that you actually desire? Is this what your organization is going to be needing for this visibility, whether it's in a traditional environment, any sort of hybrid environment, and being able to get the visibility, whether this is a compliance requirement, an internal requirement, and really how can we integrate this into the environments? And also can you handle the influx of the data? Because really an NDR platform is more than just detections and alerts. We're really looking at different metadata. We can look at PCAP. We can look at all this different types of traffic analysis. And that's going to be a huge amount of data. And for you to really be able to maximize this investment is there a plan in place to really leverage it and be able to handle the data that is coming in? Because there is a lot of data that is coming in. There's a lot of things to look at. And we don't want this to be a tool that is coming in and then, it's overwhelming your SOC, overwhelming engineering, whatever it might be resource-wise. Now, for the leveraging an NDR tool, there's really two main focuses that I see is proactive versus reactive. Is your organization really focused on being proactive in threat hunting? Are you trying to look for the unknowns, whether this is unknown knowns or unknown unknowns? Or if you're also trying to find the known unknowns, and really just, am I looking for these types of threats? Am I trying to leverage the metadata that's available, the raw data that's available? Or am I simply just being reactionary? Being focused on reaction, just this is what my detections are telling me. And then this is integrating with my normal workflow. I may be dumping data to a SIM, whatever it might be. And am I really trying to leverage the network data, especially alongside something like endpoint data or any of your application logs? For this kind of bridging, when I'm doing threat hunting, for instance, I'm going to try and look at the whole picture as much as possible. And when I'm looking at this whole picture for whether I'm being proactive or reactive, what place in the organization does response even have? And response is really the big R in the room for any sort of star DR, as I call it, for NDR, EDR, XDR, those kind of acronyms, is what does response have? Because if your organization is simply, you're looking for threats, you're doing threat hunting, or I'm reacting to standard alerts that are coming through, what does response truly mean? Am I trying to prevent threats, or am I trying to watch threats? To be able to see what the most appropriate response is, what might a SOAR play in here as well for security orchestration and automation. And for choosing a tool, do I want something that try and takes the guesswork out of this? If I want strictly just a reactionary style alerts, then I'm going to want a tool that takes the guesswork out. Or we can have something that is going to dive into the details a lot better, maybe presented differently. Really depends on what the goals is for the organization of what am I doing with this data, and can I even handle the data in the first place, and what am I trying to do with it? What is my response for these particular threats that are coming in, and this network metadata that's coming in that I can potentially use in order to try and find the unknowns. And knowing what you will do is really a key point of what is the tool going to do. Now, this can be any tool. This could be an ADR, this could be a SIM, this NDR. Focus here is there a plan or a process in place for actually dealing with the alerts that come across? Is this an incident response workflow? Is this going to be I need to collect artifacts, whether it be from the network or from the endpoints? Am I trying to manage all this from my SIM? Am I trying to bring in any sort of compliance information? What is the true plan and process? Because when we look at the data that's coming out of NDR, especially the data volumes that can come on NDR at scale, we really want to look at, do I have a plan in place? Especially if you're building anything custom on top of your NDR, any custom detections. Something that we talk about is, well, if you build a custom detection, now what? This is something that you chose to be able to build in, and now how do you react to it? And also something very important for the concept of a fire hose is, what do we do with false positives? False positives very much are everywhere. It's going to happen with every tool I've ever touched. There is data that triggers on normal benign behaviors based on the context of the organization, or it's just simply, this alert triggered on something that is just normal. A badly written signature, might be something custom. And really we're bridging all of this together, so the tools don't escape from us. We're not trying to have these run away and, just be a burden on your organization. And dealing with false positives is very important. And is actually along the same lines of, is there a plan or a process in place to react to false positives? And is it something that you want to suppress? I've come across customers that say, well, we know that there's false positives. We know that this activity triggers, and they choose to keep it as such. And overarching throughout this is really what the total cost of ownership is. For the detections that an NDR is going to bring, these are, of course, network-based detections. They may have some other data streams coming into them. It depends on the tool. What is the true value from these detections coming in? And what does the value bring in the day-to-day for these detections? And then how does this influence your responses? Is this NDR is basically the data and the insight that I'm getting out of it? Is this costing more than what is actually being provided? Is the literal cost, the operations cost, or is the people cost too high, where it takes too much staff to run it, too much staff to tune the system, whatever it might be? Is the cost outweighing the actual value? Here's my detections, here's my metadata, but it's so hard to deal with, so hard to work with. We're not able to truly leverage the tool in the environment. And we want to make sure that everything's kind of working as harmoniously as possible, and also be very reasonable with cost. And that does play into a question about, whether it's something that you want to have managed externally, managed NDR, kind of a cloud service, and we'll touch more on that. So that is the extent of the slides, and we will pass it to our panel here.
Great, thank you for that, Carl. I think that really outlines just some of the things that we'll dive into a little bit deeper. I'm going to just end the first poll now. So most people have said that they do have a NDR tool, and then some people have said no. One person said no, they're not planning to. And then some have said no, but they are planning to. So a mix, but I'd say the majority on this call do have them. And then the rest are in the phase of either getting acquainted with NDR or working on the process of getting a tool themselves. So I think, first of all, I'll hand over to Andrew. Perhaps anything that you picked up on in Carl's presentation that stood out to you or that you'd like to expand on more, especially like I think the idea that NDR is a saturated market and like there's a lot going on in this area. So what do you think are the most important things?
Well, so I think that I wouldn't say that it's saturated. It's a mature market for sure. There's a lot of, I've been involved in network behavior anomaly detection, full packet capture, and network analytics for the better part of 20 plus years. So a lot of the concepts remain important. They've just either evolved somewhat or combined with other technologies to provide more visibility and more protection. I think there might be the idea that people think existing tools should just have that functionality by now, or it should be included in their firewall. It should be included in whatever network-based appliances they have, but it's not that easy just to shoehorn a technology like this onto an existing tool or platform that is responsible for passing traffic and enforcing some sort of policy on that traffic.
Yeah, I think the integration with other tools is something we'll definitely touch on later in this discussion. Diana, over to you for your kind of like opening thoughts.
Sure. First, I'd like to thank Andrew for mentioning network behavioral anomaly detection, which is sometimes known as NBAD, which is something that we
in our day we called it NBAD.
Huh?
Said in our day we called it NBAD.
We call it NBAD, and I wanted to call out that my former Burton Group colleague Trent Henry, who actually is the analyst who came up. Analysts, we like to come up with these acronyms. So yeah, it's a nice callback there. Yeah, as Andrew was talking about, we've really seen this as evolution, right? We need to detect and respond to threats and incidents and things that go on in our network. So there have been tools over the decades. We had the early scanning tools like was it Satan and Saint, and then we went on to intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, right? And then we had NIDS and NIPS and HIDS and HIPS, host intrusion detection, network intrusion detection. And so when we look at the NDR space, what we've really got is this evolution where we carry forth the need to do these functions of detect and respond, but we're adding technology as it matures into it. And sometimes, as Andrew pointed out, an old version of the technology, you can't just kind of bolt on, oh, now we're going to start using machine learning, supervised or unsupervised. They're going to do different things. I know we're going to talk about that later, but you can't just bolt it on. So you get new offerings into the market. So detection and response as a function in security has been around for a long time. We've got this set of tools that are now approaching it for the modern world. So detection and response in a multi-cloud world, detection and response as we have things like machine learning to help us do it in new and hopefully more effective and optimized ways.
Great, thank you. I think that kind of like gives a good flavor of the landscape as it is. And just before we move on, I'm going to launch our second poll. So for our audience members that do have a NDR tool already, And also, if you don't, maybe some of the challenges that you're a bit concerned about, you could answer in that way. But yeah, if you do have an NDR tool, how is it working for you? It works as expected. There's too many alerts coming through, not enough in-house skills to manage, proving costly to run, and not able to integrate with other security tools. So that's there for you to answer as you listen. And as I said earlier in my introduction, if you've got any questions for our speakers, please go ahead. So one of the things you mentioned, Carl, is kind of being focused on being proactive or reactionary. Could you just give a little bit more information about what you kind of mean by that, what you're seeing from your customers, and then we'll kind of ask Andrew and Diana to contribute with their thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I focus on really the two different mindsets is, am I simply allowing my tool to tell me what it thinks is wrong, or am I proactively looking in the network for something? Now that something can be many things. One of the great benefits of NDR is we're collecting, between the endpoints in the network. I mean, that is the amount of ground truth that we have available. And we can really dive into what is running, how systems are interacting with each other, and with different services, whether it's internal, external, and I could see what might be wrong. And what might be wrong is a broad subject on purpose. Is that might be wrong based on policy, and that of course is likely going to be, a lot of this focus is going to be on true malicious behaviors. And there are a lot of different detections out there for a whole host of malicious behaviors. But the one benefit here is also the, how can I look for something that isn't known, or look for something that's tailored to my specific use case? If I have the internal resources on hand where, and I see this a lot in customers, sometimes on the larger side, but also sometimes on the smaller side, is they're truly focused on the proactive threat hunting rather than just simply my tool told me it was wrong and here's the context it provided and that's it. That's really the traditional IDS mindset, is here is a pattern that was matched and that was it. And then we had to dive into some flow analysis. And if we did have full packet capture, we can dive into that. And that sort of workflow for the reactionary is still present today, even in any NDR tool I've talked to or I've seen, and also in our various customers, is it's still being very reactionary. But there's a further shift in the threat hunting aspect, is how do I search for the unknowns, and really looking at the data that we have available, because it's progressively easier as time goes on to get data into a spot, whether that's a SIM or a data lake or insert security platform here. But it's the mindset between, am I looking for something or I'm just being told something's wrong?
Yeah, Andrew, anything to add on to that?
Well, so you kind of brought up some things that I've heard almost on a weekly basis now from some of our clients when I would ask them, do you have an asset management system? Can you identify all of your assets? And the answer is usually no. Or do you have application or data flow diagrams so that you can see how data is used and how it moves through your infrastructure? And the answer is no. And they always say, well, why would I need that? And it's the same way of knowing what baseline looks like so that deviations in the baseline stick out like sore thumbs. And that is probably one of the biggest challenges of using any tool that is monitoring for an anomaly, or like whether it's a deviation in policy or a deviation in acceptable use. You need to know what good looks like. And only then do you have a ruler against which you can measure what good looks like and what looks bad, or maybe not bad, but in contrast to good, so that you may have to take it to that next level to investigate and follow up, dive a little bit deeper. So I think there's a lot of organizations that don't know what good looks like on their network or within their global infrastructure, including cloud, containers, what have you, because they've never stopped to really measure what it looks like.
Well, just to follow up on that, why are organizations, why have they not stopped? Is it because there's too much going on? They don't have the resources? What's the problem? Because I feel like this is something I've definitely heard before when talking about different things where people they're not really aware of where their data's going, what they've got. So what's the core issue, and how, for our audience, if they think, if what you've just said resonates with them and their organizations, what should they be doing?
Well, I think it probably happens because they haven't encountered enough pain to make them want to follow up on that. So any organization has 10 to 20 fires all going at the same time, vying for their attention. So they are looking to which fire is burning the brightest and the hottest at that time, and that's where the focus is. So if lack of visibility isn't the brightest fire at that point in time, that is not what they're going to dedicate their focus to.
Yeah, fair enough. Diana, over to you for some comment on the the points that Carl and Andrew made there.
Yeah, it's easy to, in your head, sort of an ivory tower think, but security is so important and the risk to the business. But the reality, as Carl and as Andrew have spoken of, is that these teams are often under-resourced and underfunded, and not on purpose, not let's starve security. It's just businesses are trying to stay afloat, trying to make a profit in this economic market right now globally. And, sometimes you have to make cuts someplace, and a lot of teams are having issues with resources, and security is often one of those teams. So even though a lot of companies would very much like to be extremely proactive and have a team either of in-house hunters that go with their IOAs, their indicators of attack, looking for anything that might be unusual, or have a managed hunt team perhaps that does it for them. Some companies can't afford it. They don't have the time. So that's the thing, that it's the nice to have. And we can say it can help prevent problems in the future, but still it comes off very often for executives. They feel like that's a nice to have, but the must have is the response part, the ability to react. So even though we know proactive is really important, a lot of times if you're really underfunded, as Andrew was pointing out, with the fires, right, that goes into the respond. Because if someone's if you've got an IOC, if you've been compromised, you've got to contain it as quickly as possible, or you're going to have a bigger loss, a bigger impact to the organization. So proactive is great. And I think that, but it's often not able to be supported. If we can do more automation on the proactive side, I think that's where we could have a big up. Machine learning is very good at probability, at going down and looking at different, spending, hours and hours going down different paths and saying this might be exploitable. So I think that's where automation could start to help us. It's not going to replace threat hunting teams, but for orgs that can't afford them, it may be something they can do until they're building up that strength.
Well, AI and ML was something we were going to touch on a bit later, but let's focus on it now as you've kind of brought it up. No, not at all. Not at all. There's no
reading ahead, Diana. You're reading
sorry.
There's no strict agenda. And for our audience, thanks. There's some answers to the polls trickling in, so do continue with those. We'll get to that later. So Carl, from your point of view then, where does AI and machine learning fit into this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I see it as kind of the next evolution. So we've obviously seen in the news all of the Chat GPT things and all of the other AI projects that are out there trying to solve interesting problems. And when we apply really the machine learning, touching on the baselining, I mean, that's very much deviations from baseline is an excellent use case there. And it's how do I make the most out of resources that are available? And that's not only for the technological, but that's also for the people resources. We, just like everyone else, has problems retaining staff, just tools in and out. There's all sorts of different challenges that customers face. And we have to maximize what's actually there. So I see that more and more leveraging of analytics and AI/ML the buzzword bingo of today is how can I get more out of the data that we have? Because data collection is a commodity. So it's being able to leverage that, be able to provide, basically to focus on the business outcomes. Because historically, if you look at a traditional writing of a signature, that's really a specific skill set. We still see it today. There's a handful of vendors that write signatures for the larger community, and it's very hyper specialized on being able to write signatures. And building analytics, whether it's streaming things or batch or whatever it might be, the behavioral analytics. This is kind of the evolution of UEBA. That can be very complicated, and it's how can we intersect those from the traditional signatures to the modern, because we just have more and more data to look at. It's beyond just packets that we're looking at, and I see that that's the next evolution. Is when we have more and more circuits, more and more bandwidth that we're monitoring, and also most importantly is the insider threats and monitoring inside of the networks. We are far, far beyond the traditional enterprise edge. Software as a service is ubiquitous for practically everything. There's a service for anything you need to run a business. I came from a small startup recently that we didn't have a corporate network. It didn't exist, and we have to be able to architect visibility inside of that. Or you have 400,000 users in a large enterprise, and the data problem and the signature authoring is kind of the detections authoring is a problem across all of those. And I see that AI/ML is really going to be applied there to kind of help with the resourcing.
Yeah, and Andrew, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, so I think one of the best applicable. So I used to run a data science and research team at OpenDNS. So we dealt with large swaths of data all the time. And I learned very quickly the difference between AI, machine learning, and statistics. That's what most people mean when they say AI and machine learning is just statistical analysis, which is a very small subcomponent of the overall discipline. But being able to take that information and feed it back into this machine to enrich and eliminate or even surface important information is going to go a long way to helping analysts determine what looks good and what looks bad. Because if we went back to the old days of signature based, all it took was one poorly configured signature and every single event was an alert that you had to chase down. And it was an absolute nightmare. That is something that can be tuned and automatically taken care of by AI and machine learning, if properly configured, to run those test cases to make sure that the false positives and true negatives aren't just blowing things up and causing a lot of problems. It's going to help narrow the focus of analysts so they can focus on what's important.
So if a question I've got then is if for our audience members that say, for example, I do have an NDR tool, I'm using it, I'm running it now, are they likely to have AI as a component of that? Is that something they would need to add on? Where does it fit in with what they've got already? Or is it something?
I'm not sales for those vendors, so I can't do that. I can tell you the marketing material probably has AI machine learning associated with the platform they're using. Whether the tool itself does, that completely depends. It's the last 10 years, we've seen very loose definitions of what the application of AI machine learning actually are. It started with marketing materials. With engineering, they can figure it out later. If we slap it on this white paper and this sales slick, yeah, by the time it gets to print, everything will be sorted on the back end. Well, now companies are holding vendors more accountable. So if they say, oh, we have AI machine learning, they're going to say, well, what does that mean? In the context of my environment and your product combined, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you can very quickly figure out if it's statistical analysis or actual machine learning and making things better.
All right, I'll head over to Carl just to add anything onto that.
No, it's very true, and it's a challenge because marketing buzzword bingo. We do it, I do it, everyone does it. I'll be the first to admit that. It's I don't have my bingo board up for some of these, but it's how can you apply it to solve the business problem, and that's because it's such a generic term that's used, and now it's really becoming mainstream on people to say, oh, that's AI or that's ML. And like, what does that truly mean? It's a very specialized field, but as I see it, cyber is growing into a data problem. The network generates a huge amount of data, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of events per second that you have to deal with, historical analysis. And it just simply is, we're trying to apply use cases that were found in marketing, found in user behavior tracking on websites and things, the metas of the world that have hundreds of petabytes of data. It's still a data problem, and in cyber it's also a data problem. We're just trying to find bad things, and the big names do it as well. It's very interesting to see kind of how that's truly applied. I fully agree with the difference between marketing and the what is the business value that's being provided can be very vague sometimes.
Yeah. And we're getting to a point now where computer science students and computer engineers are coming out of school with exposure to AI machine learning in the most practical of sense. So it's not going to be long before those people are brought onto calls when the vendor calls in and they say, oh, we have AI machine learning, and say, oh, well, here are the 10 things that I classify as AI machine learning. Do you do this? No. Do you do this? No. Do you do this? No. Okay, I'm going to stop going down this list because you don't do this. And I think vendors are going to be held to a much higher standard now than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, which I think is long overdue, because we have. I just also want to preface. One CISO said to me, "What do I care how they're doing it if it works?" Which there's something to that, but also there has been this kind of sprinkling magical ML fairy dust over marketing literature with we'll do everything. Our ML so incredibly smart. I've asked vendors things like, well, what kind of models are you using? You're using supervised, which is labeled data, or unsupervised, unlabeled, and supervised. And I've had vendors tell me things ranging from, if I told you I'd have to kill you, which is like weird, to that's our secret sauce, we couldn't possibly let you know, kind of stuff. So it's like, it's ours is so good, it's basically it's going to solve all the problems. But the truth is, look, there are different kinds of models. Models are built to look for or solve different problems. Supervised machine learning, a lot of tools use both supervised and unsupervised because they solve different problems. Supervised, which is again labeled, is going to be good for classification. Is this phishing or not? Good for supervised. Unsupervised is great for finding patterns. So if you've got a whole lot of data, which as Carl and Andrew have both pointed out, we all do. I mean, we have really learned how to generate a lot of data out of a lot of systems, all the way from if light bulbs go on and off, right? That could be going through someone's SIP. So tons of data, and unsupervised, really good at finding patterns in this massive haystack, finding the needles in that stack. So if a vendor, as Andrew pointed out, and I really hope that comes to happen pretty quickly, Andrew, that we have people on these calls that can say, look, if you tell me you don't have to kill me, but you might make a good sale, please explain to me not the magic, but the math of what you're doing and why. And then let's take a look and put your product into a trial to make sure that what you said it's going to do will work that way for my company and my environment.
It's almost becoming table stakes now for organizations that have smaller budgets, smaller analyst teams. They need to be able to do more with the tools they're provided. and not add additional headcount just to use a tool that they're looking to buy. So they want to lean on machine learning and AI capabilities of these security platforms to make their jobs easier and to make their analysts more efficient. So
it sounds like then it's for like our audience, it's about asking the right questions and just going into these conversations prepared with kind of trying to understand what will work for your business and working with your sales rep at whatever vendor they are, because ultimately they're there to provide you with something that should help your business. So you want to have useful conversations that gets you to a point where it is helping your business. But I'm going to just draw a line under the AI conversation for now, because I think it is something like we're going to start talking about ChatGPT and asking it to write us Valentine's Day poems if we're not careful. I'm going to end the poll now. We've had a few responses. So a lot of people saying that it's working as expected, which I'm pleased for those people. Another sector of the audience have said there are too many alerts coming through, and then a couple of people, not so many, have said that they're not able to integrate it with other security tools and it is proving costly to run. So I think maybe, I know not the majority answered this, but it was something we wanted to talk about, is just how to integrate an NDR tool with the rest of the tools that you've got. So just wondered, Carl, maybe if you could just highlight maybe the main problems and the main things our audience should be thinking about, and then Andrew and Diana, I'll ask you about what our audience can be asking their vendors and like kind of understanding before they commit.
Absolutely. So what I'm really looking at these days, and this is of course a primary function of my own, but it's how can all of this work together? Because the thought process of a tool is strictly living in a silo just can't exist anymore. See our previous comments about resourcing. This has to be as automated and streamlined as possible. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean one vendor, of course. We don't want to have all our eggs in one basket. No one ever does. And how can my tool play nice, and not also pollute the downstream with too many alerts, too much metadata? How can I intelligently really work with all of the tools? And we find that really having the easy integrations is really pivotal, because we might, I've dealt with it for years of making NDR tools that no one ever logs into the interface. It's all sent to their SIM. And there's nothing wrong with that workflow because the customer plans for it. And, if they need to go back to deeper data, then they can, whether it's a pivot, it's an automation, those kind of things. And with the ubiquity of having a SOAR platform, a lot of more larger customers, but I do see that there's smaller customers that leverage it as well. You can really start automating a lot of the tasks. Since I've been working on Linux many years ago, I have a rule: if I have to do things more than 2 or 3 times, then I write a script and I automate it. Really, that sort of application is absolutely prevalent in cyber as well, because if I can automate it, streamline it, then it's going to help really basically multiply my amount of effort that I can do. And we have to look at that for any size of customer, any tools they might be running, because when I'm looking at endpoint data, which can, for the metadata side of the house, can actually be even more voluminous than the network data. And it's just absolutely massive troves of data. And these have to play together. They have to play nice together, and really have this kind of unified view into it.
Diana?
Yeah, so I think, before you go and talk to a vendor, understand what you want to do. Andrew pointed out getting data flow maps and topologies and asset maps, right? So what signal do you need the NDR tool to ingest, understand that, and think through a lot of companies, when I was doing fractional CISO work, I'd go in and I'd say, hey, where's your network? Where are your different systems? Where are the important servers? Where's the data? I'd say, well, everything's in this cloud or everything's in that cloud. And I go, okay. And then you start like actually doing, talking to people and really creating the map for them. And they're in multiple clouds with a lot more signal than they realize. So customers, before they talk to the NDR vendor, understand what N means to them, what clouds they're in, what kind of signal and information and data they need. If they need to bring in endpoint information, they probably do, or you're not getting the whole picture. So, how you're going to bring those two together and understand, because they're two parts of the whole view, right? So can you bring them together? And also talking to your vendor about not just can they ingest this kind of signal, what they do with the signal, as Carl was talking about. A lot of companies, it's true, this is security signal to them. Where they parse and analyze their security signal is inside their SIM tool. So is it going to play nice with the SIM tool? Is there going to be a lot of heavy lifting to massage or reconfigure the data in order for it to be ingestible by the SIM? And also of those places, those points in the network that you need to ingest signal from, how are you going to be able to ingest it? Is there a connector? Is there going to need some sort of transformation of that data or contextualization, enrichment of the data? What is the NDR tool going to do to make sure that it doesn't just get the data, but it's going to make it useful for your company if that's feeding it to the SIM for greater analysis, providing greater analysis in the old tool? It's going to depend on what your company wants and needs. But think about that before you talk to the vendor, because the vendor is going to try and get you to do it the way that the vendor built the product. Not because the vendor is doing anything wrong, because that was the way that made the most sense for them to solve it. That's what most customers are asking them for. So they're going to come in with a tool that works that way. It's probably going to be pretty close to what you need, but make sure that you're very clear on what you need so that you can present that to the vendor rather than having the vendor, we do it this way and it's perfect.
Yeah. And Andrew, anything to add on to that?
I agree with Diana. I helped build one of the first SIM platforms years and years ago. And my job was the integration engineering manager. So I was on the phone calling all the third-party vendors saying, hey, can you send us these types of events? Or can you tell me what these events actually mean that you're sending? Sometimes they could, sometimes they couldn't. So it's gotten much better over the years, but we still need to understand the language that the tools are speaking when we are sending events somewhere else. It's all well and good to say everything speaks English, but every tool has a different dialect of English that they speak when they're sending events and sending alerts. So we need to know what certain events mean to the vendor and what the events might mean to the receiving end, whether it's a SIM or data lake or some sort of processing tool, because there might be a miscommunication or a misunderstanding into what is actually being said and understood by the tools. So I'm a very big, I'd say, proponent of having a data dictionary published for integration partners to say, here's everything that our tool does, here's what it talks, here's what it means when it says this. And then as part of the partnership program, all of the SIM and third-party tools now know to look at this dictionary and map things accordingly within their own rules so that you're actually getting meaningful alerts and meaningful results on the other end.
I'm just thinking about, I'm sat with you guys, my North American friends, and you would say trash can, I would say rubbish bin. I was going through a few of them. I was like, what the difference is? Carl, just anything you want to add on that from like the more vendor side of things? Obviously, Andrew and Diana have talked about how to work with the vendors to make sure everything is integrated. So just wanted to give you the opportunity to add anything else on.
Absolutely, and it's something we see as well. Is that I like the analogy of speaking the same English. Is there in the context around alerts? Starting with the signature analogy. Here is what actually triggered. Okay, well, we started there, but now it's the endpoint data we might want to bring in, the activity, the user activity. the cloud service logs, whatever it might be. All of these are different data streams, but it's the context when you bring them all together. And I could start talking about XDR almost at this point, is how we can do analytics across all that, but that's a talk for another day probably. But it is, providing that context, and we absolutely see it, we can't just provide the data, but here's the reason why. And the why is a lot of, even when you're doing threat hunting across whatever it might be, endpoint data, network data, in a SIM, is I'm trying to find the why. Well, then I have to have a plan on what to do with it. Am I writing a detection? Okay, well, I still have to provide the context for that particular alert. And from an analyst mindset, when I think back of giving training on NDR, it's, okay, I found this. Now, how do I present my findings, basically? And from a tool vendor, that's basically what we're doing, is we're presenting the findings. Here's the why, here's the how, here's the where, the who, what, where, when, why. And being able to bring that together cohesively, because I see it across customers, big, small, and in between. That's the contextless alerts. Here's a thing, cool, and going back to the not sharing the secret sauce, we try and be the opposite. Is here's the detection, here's the reason, here's the deviation, here's the signature, whatever it might be, and really getting into the combining of all the above. In providing as much of that why and here's the context as possible.
Great. Thank you so much for those comments on the integration side of things. I'm going to just, in the last 10 minutes then, pick up on something we've kind of mentioned throughout, but if maybe we can think about this directly, and that's the problem of too many alerts coming through. So for those that have got an NDR tool, they're using it, how are they meant to manage that? I know we kind of touched on it on the AI side of things, I guess could work into that a little bit, but maybe Diana, if someone's facing this problem, what are the next steps to take, and how challenging is it?
Yeah, I mean, I would talk to the vendor about what kinds of false positives you're getting, if there's just huge amounts of alerts, because if you the vendor's going to understand their tool and will be able to work with you at your organization to try to tune that down, because it's very tempting to make something very quiet. You're getting overwhelmed with alerts, so there's this sort of almost knee-jerk response of just turn it down. But you don't want to just do that sort of broad brush, because the whole reason you have this tool is to find those anomalies, those potential problems, or the big problems, and and attackers love to go low and slow and quiet. So if you just turn it down without understanding why you're getting so much noise, it's very, very likely that you're going to miss out on what you have the tool in the first place for. So working with your vendor, with your team, to understand what's the cause of all of that noise, and then tune very surgically so that you're looking for what you need and not just turning down all, because this is about pattern. This is about a lot of signal, and making sure that all the noise doesn't overwhelm the ability to find the signal. So number one, figure out what's causing the extra noise, but turn it down very, very surgically.
Andrew, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I think you need to sit back and articulate what you're looking to achieve. So if there are certain policies or organizational objectives you're looking to meet, that will help you better understand what types of messages, alerts, value you're going to get from your tool. Every tool that you buy should address an identified organizational problem or requirement. And you should have a policy that is associated with that part of the program. So if you can sit back and say, I need visibility into this, and this, in this case, maps to, okay, well, I need to see what's happening on my network. I need to see what east-west traffic looks like. I have use cases around insider threat that are concerning to me. You can map that back and then look at what types of alerts will support that visibility. So now you've narrowed your subset. Instead of trying to get every sort of event squeezed out of a tool, you have a subset of things that you care about. And there could be some adjacencies, but you have an initial corpus that you can focus on and then expand from there. Instead of trying to do absolutely everything at once and then dial it back, you can start very, very small and then expand outwards.
Great. And Carl, on your side of things, what do you kind of advise to customers and clients when they come to you, hopefully, as Diana has advised, and say, like, I'm getting too many alerts, how do I manage this?
Yeah, so it's actually a combination of, both Diana and Andrew is, being the proactivity versus reaction plays along with whether you're tactical or whether you're being selective on how much you're analyzing, or you're trying to analyze everything. Now, the tactical approach can be very useful, but as Andrew mentioned, you might miss something, and or whoever said that, sorry, you don't want to miss something. But the challenge is if you're analyzing everything, with your visibility, and NDR is a great example of one of the largest data loads that you can have in cyber, especially full packet capture on up, is whether that's going to get away from you. Am I looking at too much? And does my tool, or does the tool have the actual tuning options that I need? Can I truly exclude the traffic based on whatever context that is available? Can I actually integrate that with my business goals, my business objectives? If I'm truly trying to find only bad things, then we can be very selective about what we turn on. Here is the malware signatures. Here is just referencing ET Pro for a minute. Instead of looking for the informational items, I can do the analysis on informational later, or that I can use that for threat hunting, depending on the metadata I have available. And we really try and work with customers to, what's the middle? Because I see it as twofold. Of part of it is training, but also part of it is what can the tool do? Because training a mindset of how do I react to something appropriately, whether this is an incident response workflow that I'm triggering, or whether this is a tune, in the false positive, or basically the alert analysis realm. I try and tell people to train away bias as much as possible. So approach every alert, especially higher severity ones, of there's no assumption that this was wrong. There's no assumption that it is wrong or isn't wrong. I am coming into it an open mind. But if you have the organizational context available to you, this is what these services should be doing. This is the normal data flow. This is what my assets are doing, my endpoints, my networks, so on. Then you can quickly rule out items. Like, hey, I do have an application that encodes passwords this way. Okay, well, if that's the case and we're analyzing traffic in that spot, then we likely have to tune that out, or whatever it might be along those lines. But that sort of context, part of that is human, that we still have to focus on, and training away the bias can be very critical as well.
Yeah. Diana, you're shaking your head there. Anything to add on the training side of things?
The bias is just a really big one, because these tools, machine learning will usually grows bias over time. So you really want to make sure that humans are looking at what's coming out of the tool, so you can recalibrate it as needed. So just strongly agree.
Excellent. So we've got just over 5 minutes left of the session now. And what I like to do is ask our panelists for some of their key takeaways for our audience. I think you've given some really great advice and some key things to think about, especially given that our audience kind of indicated to us that they have these kind of tools or are definitely looking into them. So perhaps, Andrew, we could start with you, just a minute or so, some key points that you think are important to highlight, to take away for our audience.
Sure. One, always ask the vendor to explain what they mean when they're talking about AI machine learning, and how it relates to your organization. Two, make sure you understand the assets that you have, so what you're protecting, and the data flows within your environment, so you know how the data could move or is expected to move. And when it does move in a way that doesn't follow that flow, you get an alert. And make sure that you have policies and an idea of what every tool that you have purchased, why it exists. Make sure you have that so that you can justify your renewal for that tool this time next year.
Yeah, Diana, over to you.
Yeah, so I would run tests to make sure, for those that have NDR, run tests regularly to make sure that you're getting the most value out of these tools. They're very powerful, but you need to make sure you're running them and also using the information the best way you can. So making sure that you're doing that. It's not just sort of like we have it and it's somehow magically fixing everything, right? It's you gotta work with the tool to get the most benefit from it. And the other thing is, anybody who doesn't have an NDR tool, I know there were some people on the survey that didn't have some were thinking about it. I have heard from some CEOs, CFOs at some of the companies I used to work with, so they were sort of medium, smaller companies. They didn't have full-time CISOs yet. You're saying that, well, why would we need that? There's no network anymore. Yeah, Carl was saying there wasn't a corporate network. There's still network traffic that goes on. It could be your VPC out in the cloud. It could be that you're a company that actually has more legacy than you realize. You've got manufacturing, you've got an OT shop for something like that. But it's true that the network has changed, but there's still a whole lot of network traffic. So if you think that you don't need it, you do. You really do need to get a full picture of your organization. You need to understand network traffic and endpoint traffic. It's just our networks have changed significantly since we were little closed loops on-prem when I got started back in the late 80s.
Carl, final thoughts from yourself then?
Yeah, I would say that echoing what the other two have said as well, but it's really the focus on, I talk a lot about, instrumenting for visibility. So, how do I take out the blind spots? And this is really the NDR, EDR, what my SIM is covering, my data flow from all my services, whatever it might be. And, having a plan on what to do with it. Really is a key takeaway. It doesn't matter what organization size. Our customers range from little tiny, 50-person office to massive multinational. And, we have to make sure that how we're interacting with their business makes sense for customers across the board, and kind of delivering the outcome. And of course, making sure it's, at a competitive price point and all those usual vendor buzzwords, but I'll leave those alone. But it's really around, I do agree with the testing, the red teaming, the blue teaming, purple teaming, make sure, and this goes across the board of your tools and detections and also your policies and procedures. We all get our yearly compliance training talking about phishing emails and, how to spot the fish. Well, it's the same thing for the SOC. Is making sure that you're testing your tools and really trying to leverage them as much as you can. And knowing what you're going to do with it is really a key point that I have is don't just buy a tool because the marketing said you should. It's absolutely how am I going to use this in my environment? And really what value is it going to bring me?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that's some really good points for our audience to go away and think about. But with that, it does bring us to the end of today's session. So thank you to Carl, Andrew, Diana, and Diana's cat in the background there.
Flatty.
Yeah. So thank you guys for sharing your expertise with us today. For our audience, if you did miss any of the session or feel a colleague would benefit from some of the tips that the guys have shared today, this session will be available on demand via the same link that you're accessing it now. So feel free to share that with friends, colleagues, whoever you think might be interested. But with that, I'm going to close out today's session. Thank you, everybody, and wish you well.
Thank you.
Right.